The new September record snowfall opened up on Saturday, the 28th. It did not stop giving until Monday, the 30th. Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History, now in its second year from the Weather Network in Canada. Only 1 week into the fall, this achieved an all-new September record for snowfall totals, and it started its massive accumulation this day in weather history. We were only 1 week into fall, not winter, fall. We hear it all the time. The whining, the moaning. We didn't have a spring this year. It went from cold to summer. And then we also hear this one. We didn't have a fall. It went from summer straight to an all-out snow attack. Now, normally I would just roll my eyes. But today was an isolated case where it was fully warranted. Follow me. Waterton Lakes National Park, 95 centimeters. 5 centimeters short of a full meter, and that happened in only 2 days. Chain Lakes, pretty close to that, at 80 centimeters. Lethbridge, 60 centimeters. Calgary, 24.5 centimeters. And that happened on Sunday the 29th alone, beating the old record of 22 and a bit back in 1985. As you can appreciate, travel was brutal, regardless of what mode you chose. Flights were canceled and the power went out for many. So after a weekend of chaos and dangerous condition, you'd hope that Monday would be that better day just in time for the rush hour to get back to work and school. Nope. Welcome to year 2 of this podcast. Right now, you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider. But there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective. But oftentimes, they will include visuals from that day's event from when it happened in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. And just to dovetail from that if I can, I'd like to remind you where you can catch this podcast. If you might be picking this up off our site or from within a story, you can look up or ask for This Day in Weather History, wherever you normally listen to your favorite podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Alexa, and now every day on yahoo.ca. 300 collisions. You'd think that just by looking out your window, you'd know well enough to drive to the conditions or not go out at all. It had been horrendous for the previous 3 days. Drivers in southern Alberta were urged to keep off the roads, if at all possible, through Monday. That obviously fell on 300 deaf ears. One particular accident occurred along the Deerfoot Trail where 16 vehicles were involved. So just what happened? Well, the Arctic boundary was making its way down with the tilt of the planet starting to tilt back at this time of year, but we still have the battling, lingering effects of summer in place. It's why we call it a shoulder season or a transitional season. On this occasion, the low was soaking wet and it collided well with the Arctic dry front and boom, that equaled heavy snow. Snowfall and winter storm warnings were issued across both regions, including for the metropolitan city of Calgary. But that big event, the one that Weather Network's Kyle Britton reported from, was further south and west near the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, and that's where almost 100 centimeters covered Waterton Lakes National Park. As well as terrible travel conditions, flight cancellations, and mass power outages, there are also a lot of tree damage in the areas where those affected remembered this storm as an historic early autumn event. And it all kicked off in grand fashion on September 28th of 2019, this day in weather history. Hey, do you like the podcast? We'd love to hear from you. If you have an idea, go right now to wherever you're listening to me and rate us if you would, please. It's on a 5-star system, and we would love as many stars as you can afford. So rate us, but then also review us. This way we can always stay on top of how you'd like to see the show evolve. Then remember to subscribe to this podcast. Click the subscribe or follow button right there on the very same podcast homepage you're listening on. You'll be immediately reminded that the next day is ready to listen to, and you also have access to every episode in the archives. It dates back to June 1st of 2020, so there is a lot that we got to get caught up on this day in weather history. Tomorrow is September 29th, and for this day, we look back to what was described as the worst storm to hit Halifax since 1893. Buckle up. This is Hurricane Juan. The demand was highest for tomorrow's story, as all in Atlantic Canada will never forget the impact and lingering effects of Hurricane Juan. Tomorrow we start from landfall, when it happened on September 29th, 2003. This day in weather history with me, your host, Chris May.